Is that better? Okay. Alrighty. We'll be discussing a few things today. First is the process of reverse engineering the Phison 2251-03 firmware to allow patching and adding new functionality. How USB thumb drives can be updated with new or modified firmware to add additional features. And how custom firmware can turn a cheap thumb drive into something completely different. We'll also talk about the type of attack, the history of using programmable USB devices this way, and touch just a little bit on how this could be detected. So first off, just let me ask, who here has heard of BadUSB before? Okay, good. Who is here because you want to take advantage of this? Alrighty. Who is here because you want to defend against it? Interesting. Okay, so an important question is, what is BadUSB really? It's a set of technical decisions and a flaw in user perception. In reality, BadUSB isn't a flaw. It's not a vulnerability. It's completely compliant with USB specifications. It's decisions made by device manufacturers coupled with a problem with the way people perceive the devices that they connect to their computers. When somebody looks at a thumb drive, when a user looks at a thumb drive, what they perceive is nothing more than a storage device. But that's obviously an oversimplification. It's effectively a computer, a programmable computer. So it's this perception that has allowed BadUSB to become a thing. So we have a small programmable device that looks like something that the user would trust, that can be programmed to be anything. So BadUSB is just a concept. For this talk, we are focusing on one specific drive. It's the Patriot 8 GB Supersonic Express. It's a USB 3.0 device powered by, as I mentioned, the Phison 2251-03 controller with a Toshiba NAND chip. There are many different controllers out there made by Phison. It is the most common controller that you'll find in a thumb drive. We picked one specific model just to simplify things, but there are several different out there, and these techniques can be ported to those others. The one we're looking at, they're easy to acquire. They're about $10 on eBay, or on Amazon, rather. So this is the controller. It's a system on a chip, so there are multiple pieces of hardware that you're interacting with when you're dealing with this thing. But for the purpose of this talk, there's only a few that we care about. That is the Intel 8051 controller. So we're talking pure 1980s technology here. 256 kilobytes of external RAM. And the USB controller, it seems suspiciously similar to the Cypress Easy USB, but we've not been able to confirm that for sure. So here is Brandon Wilson to dig into some details of the firmware and what you need to know if you want to write your own code for it.
As stated, I'm Brandon Wilson. Not much of a public speaker, a little nervous, so you'll have to forgive me. Try to keep this brief because we've got some demos I want to show you. We've reverse engineered some of the key parts of the firmware and analyzed its behavior, and through this we've learned a few things which we'll try to get into here. Word of warning, we've killed several drives in the reverse engineering development process, so don't mess with drives that have any important data on them because you're probably going to lose it. Well, I've killed several already. So this is a rough overview of the boot process. First, the boot image is executed from memory on the Phison system on a chip. It's in a boot ROM, and it then loads the firmware from the NAND if it can connect to it, and it loads the first 32 kilobytes of it into X-data or external RAM, and if it can't connect to it, then it stays in boot mode and waits for it to be programmed. Once it's loaded, the CPU resets and it starts executing at address 0, like any 8051. If you want to avoid booting the firmware, or you've bricked it or screwed it up in some way, you can short the pins that connect to the NAND to force it into boot mode, because it obviously can't load it, so it sits and waits. This is useful if you burn a bad firmware image, or if you want to dump potentially dangerous firmware from a drive, or just inspect it. We wrote a tool called DerbyCon that has a feature that lets you dump the firmware, so that'll let you study it, patch it, analyze it, and hopefully change it. This is kind of the way memory is normally laid out. To allow for firmware images that are much larger than 32 kilobytes, it uses a custom paging system. So after that first 32 kilobytes gets loaded from NAND to address 0, it swaps in 16 kilobyte pages as it needs it, starting at address 5000, which is in the middle of that 32 kilobytes. So it intentionally doesn't use all of that 32 kilobytes. It only goes up to 4F-ish. But it intentionally leaves 5000 alone. So from 5000 and below, it's always available, and the upper 16 kilobytes can be swapped in as it's needed. Whenever code needs to be called on a different page, it lets the base section at the bottom there do it. So it calls a function on the base page, which saves the current page on the stack, swaps in the new one from the NAND, transfers control to it, and then once that returns, it restores the original page that was on the stack. The firmware is separated into up to 16 of these, with some being unused. In our case, we've patched our code into the kilobyte or so of empty space at the end of the blue base page there. So we can patch in code without overriding anything existing, which makes it that much harder to detect modified firmware, because it doesn't really look all that different. Code can be injected into the other pages as well, but the base page is the most valuable area since it's always accessible no matter what page you're on. Whichever page is swapped in, it's going to be able to access it. The firmware update process is a little bit interesting. It's a multi-step process. It starts off with the boot image, and it's handled partially by that and partially by a burner image, where it's kind of like an executable that has to be sent to the device. This burner is basically a really small, simplified version of the firmware that implements just enough functionality to be able to write the firmware to the NAND, the new firmware to the NAND. So to update it, you have to be in boot mode, and you can enter this by sending a special SCSI command that they came up with, or the much scarier route, you can short the pins on the NAND. But once you're in there, we use a tool that we wrote to send the burner image, and then that burner image will take over control and wait for more commands over USB. So we send the firmware image using that same tool, and the burner takes the data and writes it to the NAND. It's important to note that there are no signatures in this process, no checksums, no nothing. It takes whatever you give it and writes it there. So this is something that anyone with some experience with reverse engineering embedded systems can do. It's just a matter of investing the time to do it and being crazy enough to do it, I guess. So the integrity of these devices is based entirely on obscurity. Pain points, when it comes to actually changing the firmware on the device, we have two options. We can either patch what's already there, or we can write completely new firmware from scratch and recreate all the functionality that it's responsible for. The existing firmware is extremely touchy. It's very easy to destabilize it. It uses almost all of the RAM. You change one bit and you're done. You're bricked. So finding any amount of unused RAM is difficult. Compounded with the fact that everything is memory mapped, so some ranges are actual memory, actual RAM, and others interact with hardware like the USB controller, as well as the NAND hardware. Not all of the hardware is understood, at least by us, and is completely undocumented, so all that we can do is look at how the firmware accesses these registers and try to guess how it's using them, as well as the RAM that's in it. NAND access is a special kind of pain, or hell, I guess, and it's very complicated. It sucks, basically. There are no standard command set. There actually is. It's called ONFI, or the Open NAND Flash Interface, but a lot of flash chips don't follow it. So you never know what you're going to get. You're never going to know how to talk to it. Bad block management. The firmware is responsible for taking the logical block address that the PC wants to read from or write to, and translate that to where it physically is on the NAND. So if some of the blocks on the NAND are bad, it has to deal with it. It's got to keep track of all that. It's got to redirect them. It's very painful. And also global wear leveling. So it has to try to keep the writes uniform all over the chip, so you don't keep writing to the same sector, the same block over and over. So because it's so easy to corrupt the state of the device, even the smallest change can have a drastic impact on it. And no matter which route you go with, you're going to inevitably brick it at least a dozen times. I guarantee it. Which means you're probably going to have to short the pins on the NAND to boot from ROM. Since I had to do that so many times, I had to come up with something to make it easy to short the pins on the NAND and plug it in at the same time into the computer over and over and over and over again. So I made this little thing, which is just a little switch. I just added a switch on the 5-volt line, so you just flick the switch, you kill the power to it, and so you can use one hand to do that, and the other hand to short the pins. I've had to do it so many times. I've actually broken the pins on several of my drives. I've done it that many times, put that much force on it, so it's not good. During this talk, we'll be releasing a few new tools and our code that we wrote for the firmware patches and the custom firmware that we'll demonstrate in a minute here, hopefully. These are the tools you'll see us use, assuming we get to see them. They'll be on GitHub for you to use or modify. So we're releasing everything we've done here. Nothing's being held back. We believe that this information shouldn't be limited to a select few. Others have treated it. But it needs to be available to the public. And it's been understood for a long time that these attacks are possible. I mean, if it has updated firmware, there's always some chance it could be updated to be malicious. But the knowledge of how to do this has been limited to those who either have the resources to reverse engineer it or the insane level of insanity. While the firmware isn't that complex for this one, 8051's not exactly fun, and you have zero documentation on the hardware, and everything you do is going to brick it. So it's a bit tedious. So there's only so many organizations that have had the resources necessary to make this happen. It's not something that the average pen tester would be able to use. So for those here that are trying to defend, I mean, are the people that would love to steal your data financed well enough to be able to do this? Yes, they are. So this is the disparity we're trying to eliminate here by releasing this. I mean, you can't test it if you don't have access to the same tools that a real attacker would.
Okay, so we have 3 demos for you. The first is going to be a completely custom firmware that turns the device into a programmable keyboard, basically a rubber ducky. The second is a simple way to hide data on a drive. It acts like a normal drive, except for a few seconds after you eject the drive, it re-enumerates and mounts a second completely hidden partition. This defeats forensic tools or anything else that you can throw at it. It's a very simple way to hide data. You can take the drive, format it, do whatever you want, walk out the door, you still have your data. The third just might be my favorite. It's also the simplest. Most thumb drives today support multiple modes. The mode that most people are familiar with is mode 3, which is a single partition. There's also mode 7, which is 2 partitions, one of which is encrypted by a user-supplied password. With more push for removable media to be encrypted, a lot of organizations are relying on this feature to ensure that sensitive data doesn't walk out the door. So, I did the logical thing. I overwrote the password. So, we've patched the firmware so that when you set the password, it overwrites with all A's. So, any password will unlock the drive, making it nothing more than a thin facade. The user believes it's secure, but no, there's nothing there. So, the first one up is going to be a demo of the rubber ducky type custom firmware. There is one limitation. It is the firmware, or the payload is limited to about 16 kilobytes because we're actually embedding it in the firmware itself. So, let's see that one in action. Do you have the drives? Okay. Do you have the backup for the... Yeah. All right. I was going to show you the process of flashing the drive and going through that, but in the interest of time... This one? Okay. All right, so let's see what happens when we plug this one in. So like I said, this is a standard thumb drive. This takes a standard inject.bin rubber ducky payload, so you can use pretty much any of them on here. These things are $10 a whack. You know, plenty cheap enough to buy a few and just drop them on the floor and see what happens. So, our next demo is being able to hide data on the drive. I really like this one because it's something most people just simply would not expect. I grabbed the wrong drive, didn't I? Sorry, just a second. Nope. One problem when we're doing this is, if you notice, we have a whole pile of these drives that look exactly identical. It's easy for them to get mixed up. All right, so this right here is our drive, right? If you plug it in, you see the one file on it. Look at it in forensics tools, do whatever you want. That's all there is to the drive. So, what I will do is I will come here and eject the drive and just watch what happens. Normally, with a thumb drive, it's just going to sit there and nothing ever happens until you remove the drive physically. This one does something just slightly different. A completely separate, completely hidden partition. Like I said, put whatever you want, go back to the main partition, format it, doesn't matter, walk out the door with your data. Very clean, very simple. And we're back to public. Yes. Yeah, if you do the eject, it'll just flip between the two different partitions. It will go back to the public side, no matter what. Okay, so these two partitions here, what you're looking at is a fresh drive that's set to mode 7, so it's got the two partitions, one of which is encrypted. The password hasn't been set yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, use the application provided by Phison to do this. Set the password. Something short, something easy. And you can see it's now complete. So, remove the drive, put it back in. Give it just a second here. These drives can be finicky on occasion. What should have happened there is you would see a second drive with the media unmounted. Oh, come on. Yeah, it's... that one. All right, so... Why is it? Well, anyhow, I'm not gonna... Oh, there we go. So, I'm not gonna waste too much time on that one. The point is, very simple patch, only modifies a few bytes of the firmware, but it completely disables that protection that users are counting on. All right. All right, so I'm going to give it back to Brandon for a second to talk for a minute about possibilities for detecting this.
there's been a lot of questions about how to defend against it out there. So let's look at the two main categories. There are composite devices. Your typical BadUSB attack, your classic BadUSB attack is a mass storage device that suddenly re-enumerates as a composite device, but has something extra. So like a HID device, a network adapter, or whatever. There may be some defense against this, or at least detection when this happens, because Windows has some APIs available that would let you monitor connected devices and the hubs and what's on each port, and detect when a device disconnects and very quickly comes back as something else, such as a composite device. So it just disappears and comes back within a second. A human being didn't do that. We hoped to release a proof of concept tool for this, but there just wasn't enough time. So there may be some hope. It's not bulletproof. It certainly doesn't stop it from happening, but it tells you it's happening, so you can freak out and unplug it. The other one is modified firmware. Both of the demos we had only show up as a mass storage device, not a composite device, so that doesn't help with that type of detection. It's a big question mark there because there really aren't any good options. The best you could do is dump the firmware and compare it to known samples for the same version, see if there are changes. Start whitelisting hashes or something, but that's really all you can do. So there's a big question mark there because, long story short, there really aren't any good options because you're dealing with a computer, a tiny little computer that has complete control over what happens over USB. So it can lie to you, it can do whatever. So there's some options if somebody wants to pursue it, but not a whole lot.
So, everything that we've done will be on our GitHub repository here in just a few minutes. The belief we have is that all of this should be public. It shouldn't be held back. So we're releasing everything that we've got, all the materials. I want to make a note to thank this SR Labs team. They're the ones that popularized BadUSB. They did a really great job with the work that they did. We have not been in contact with them. This talk is not related to their research. This was actually largely inspired by the fact that they didn't release their material. If you're going to say something, if you're going to prove that there's a flaw, you need to release the material so people can defend against it. Another special thanks to Richard Harmon. Did a fantastic talk going over a lot of the details of these drives and the tools that are out there, a lot of the history on the research that's been done on them. I really wish I had time to cover some of that material, but I don't, so go watch his talk. So, just to kind of wrap up for a second, I wish we could have spent some more time on the demos, but we've only got a few minutes, so. The reason that we're doing this is in hopes that we can provide a platform that other people can build on. A basis, a proof of concept that can then be leveraged to do more. And that's the reason we're releasing everything we have. That's, why we're doing on GitHub. We're hoping, to get some pull requests in. These are very flexible drives. They can do a lot. It just takes a little bit of time and effort, a little bit of investment, but you could do some really fun things with them. So we don't really have any time for questions right now. I want to, get out of the way for the next speaker. But we'll be around. If you have any questions, feel free to grab us outside. Everybody, thank you.